The night everything changed. Nobody in that room was paying attention to the right person. The Meridian Club sat at the corner of King and Bay, 42 floors above the city, and on the last Friday of October, the Caldwell and Rourke architecture firm held its annual awards dinner in the private ballroom on the top floor. The kind of event where the invitations were cream-colored cardstock and the canapés were things most people couldn't name but ate anyway. The chandeliers were real crystal. The view stretched all the way to the lake, where the lights of the harbor blurred into the dark water like something you'd paint if you were trying to prove a point about beauty. Gordon Aldcroft arrived alone, which nobody noticed, because Gordon Aldcroft always arrived alone. He was 53 years old, which showed in the gray at his temples, but not much else. Medium height. A suit that was well made but not flashy, charcoal, no pocket square, no cufflinks that caught the light. He had the kind of face that people described, later, as quiet. Not plain, not forgettable, just quiet, like a room before someone speaks in it. He collected his name badge from the table near the entrance, slid it into his breast pocket instead of pinning it to his lapel, and found a spot near the window where he could stand with a glass of water and watch the room settle into itself. He was good at watching. There were perhaps 90 people in the room, associates, partners, clients, spouses, the usual constellations of a firm dinner. The junior architects clustered near the bar, laughing too hard at things that weren't quite funny yet. The senior partners holding court in the center of the room, their orbits wider, slower, more deliberate. The clients drifted between both groups, never quite belonging to either. Gordon had been coming to this dinner for 11 years. He knew the room's grammar by heart. He was watching the senior partners when he noticed her. She was standing near the far wall, beside a floor-to-ceiling window, with a glass of white wine she hadn't touched. Her dress was burgundy. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a way that looked like she'd done it herself in a hotel bathroom mirror, and then second-guessed it twice. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, he thought, though he was bad with ages. What he could read, and had always been able to read, was posture. Hers said, "I'm not sure I'm supposed to be here." Her name badge said René Colbert. He didn't know her. She wasn't one of the architects. A client, maybe. Or someone's guest. He watched without being obvious about watching as two women from the firm's interiors team walked past her. One of them glanced at the name badge. Her smile didn't reach its usual height. They kept moving. A man Gordon recognized. Fletcher Moss, one of the firm's more successful project managers, loud in the way that certain men at certain career stages became loud, passed René close enough to make eye contact. He didn't. He was already turning to shake someone else's hand. Gordon took a slow sip of water. He had seen this kind of thing before. The social temperature of a room was something you could feel if you paid attention, and the temperature around René Colbert was several degrees below the rest of the space. People weren't being cruel. They were being something subtler and, in some ways, worse. They were being careful. Someone in this room had decided she was a liability. He didn't know why. He didn't need to yet. The dinner was called to order at 7. They were seated at assigned tables. Gordon found his near the middle of the room, beside a structural engineer named Thomas Winfield, who spent most of the first course explaining, unprompted, the load-bearing challenges of a project in Mississauga. Gordon listened with genuine attention, because he was that kind of person, and because structural engineering was more interesting than most people assumed. René was seated 3 tables away beside a woman who spoke to her briefly at the start of the meal and then rotated her body 45 degrees toward the person on her other side and didn't rotate back. The seat to René's left was empty. Someone had not come. Gordon watched her navigate the meal the way you navigate something you've decided to get through rather than enjoy. She read the menu card. She broke her bread roll into pieces she didn't eat. She checked her phone once, briefly, and put it face down on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone who did not want to be caught checking it again. He looked away before she could feel him looking. The awards portion of the evening began after the main course. The firm's managing partner, a tall man named Bruce Ashfield, who wore his authority the way certain men wore expensive watches, constantly, and with awareness, took the podium and began the annual recitation of accomplishments. There were 7 awards. Gordon won one of them. He walked up, shook Bruce's hand, accepted the framed certificate, said thank you into the microphone in a voice that was clear and unhurried, and walked back to his seat. Tomas Winfield, beside him, leaned over. "I didn't realize you led the Creston Lakeview project." "I did," Gordon said. "That project was enormous, it was." Thomas looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a previous estimate. Gordon recognized the expression. He'd seen it most of his adult life. He had grown into his reticence the way other men grew into their confidence, not as a strategy, but as a fact of character. He had never been able to perform himself. What was there, and what wasn't, wasn't. People occasionally mistook the quietness for smallness. That was their arithmetic to correct. After dessert, the room loosened into the after-dinner portion of the evening, which was the part Gordon had always found most revealing. The speeches were done. The awards were given. What remained was the unscripted hour or two, where people showed you, if you were watching, exactly who they were. He refilled his water at the bar and turned back to survey the room. Renee was still at her table. Everyone else at that table had migrated elsewhere. She had her wine glass again, a different one, red this time, and she was looking at the lights of the harbor with the careful blankness of someone who has decided that looking out a window is a dignified alternative to looking lost. Gordon stood where he was for a moment. He thought about the evening as it was currently unfolding. He had done what he came to do. The award was in his coat pocket. He had spoken to the people he needed to speak to and had endured the conversations he hadn't needed but had been unable to avoid. He could leave now. It was past 9. He had a project review at 7:30 in the morning. He thought about all of that. Then he thought about the way Renee had broken her bread roll into pieces she didn't eat. He set his water glass down on a nearby table and crossed the room. She noticed him coming but gave no indication of it until he stopped beside her table and said quietly, "The harbor view from this angle is better than from the west side of the room." She looked at him. Her expression was composed in the way expressions are composed when someone has been working to maintain them for several hours. "I hadn't noticed," she said. "The light refracts differently off the western quay," he said. "There's a crane that's been sitting out there for 6 months. Unfinished project. At night, with the lights on it, it looks like something from a painting." She looked out the window again, found the crane. The light on it was amber, and he was right. It did look like a painting. Something patient and industrial and oddly beautiful. "Gordon Aldcroft," he said, and extended his hand. She took it. Her handshake was direct. "Renee Colbert, I know. I read your badge earlier." He said it without apology, which somehow made it easier. "You're from the Colbert Group?" Something shifted slightly in her face. "Yes, we were. We were brought in as a client consult on the Harborview Terrace project. Before the restructuring." The phrasing told him several things. The word before told him the most. "I've heard of the Harborview Terrace project," he said, which was an understatement. The Harborview Terrace project had been the firm's largest residential commission in 8 years, and its restructuring, a polite word for the collapse of the original funding partnership, had been the source of considerable internal disruption for the better part of a year. He had not been involved directly, but he had been paying attention as he always did. "You don't have to make conversation with me," Renee said. Not unkindly, just plainly. "I know," he said. "I'm aware of the situation regarding this firm and my company. I know why people have been." She stopped, reorganized. "I came tonight because I was told it would help normalize things. That was probably poor advice." Gordon considered that for a moment. "Who told you that?" "My brother-in-law. He means well. Most people who give poor advice do." She laughed, a short, involuntary sound that seemed to surprise her. She pressed her fingers briefly to her lips as if checking whether it had actually happened. "The Harborview collapse," Gordon said carefully. "Was that your decision or your predecessor's?" She looked at him directly. "My predecessors. I took over the Colbert Group 14 months ago after my father's stroke. The Harborview partnership had already been structured before I came in. The terms they were not terms I would have agreed to. But I inherited them." He nodded. He had suspected something like this. The kind of social quarantine Renee had been subjected to all evening had a particular quality. It wasn't the quarantine of someone who had done something obviously wrong. It was the quarantine of someone who had been made adjacent to something uncomfortable, and whom people were keeping at arm's length not because they blamed her, but because proximity required an opinion, and opinions were expensive in rooms like this one. The Harborview project had structural issues that predated your company's involvement by 2 years, Gordon said. I read the engineering reports. The foundation consultation was inadequate from the beginning. Your company's funding withdrawal was probably the only honest thing that happened in that entire process. Renee was very still. I realize, he added, that knowing that doesn't make tonight easier. No, she said. But it's the first accurate thing anyone's said to me in this building in 8 months. They stood for a moment in the shared silence of two people who have just said something true to each other, which is its own kind of relief. Would you like to sit, he asked, or we could stand. The standing is fine. I've been standing most of the evening anyway. You won an award tonight, she said. I saw. Creston Lakeview. Yes, that project is extraordinary. I drove past it once before the glass went in, and even then, the proportions were remarkable. Gordon said nothing for a moment, because he was not accustomed to compliments that arrived with that level of specific accuracy. Thank you, he said. Most people notice it once the glass is in. I notice things earlier, she said. It's a liability sometimes. You see the structure before you see the finished thing. You're already attached to what it could become, not what it is. He thought about that. I've heard that called foresight. I've had it called impatience. By whom? She smiled, and it was a different kind of smile than the composed one she'd been maintaining for the last 3 hours. By most of the people who've worked for me, and my ex-husband, though his opinion is only moderately relevant at this point. Gordon nodded, very slightly. He filed that away without response, the way you file things that are offered not for comment but for context. They talked for a long time. That was later, the thing that he remembered most clearly. Not any single exchange, but the texture of the conversations itself. It had the quality of a conversation that begins as one thing and becomes another without either person deciding to let it. They talked about the Harborview project, and then they talked about her father's company, and then they talked about her father. And then somehow they were talking about the city, about the way certain buildings changed the character of a neighborhood, and certain buildings didn't, about what it meant to build something that outlasted the argument about whether it should have been built at all. She was sharper than he'd expected, which was unfair of him to have expected otherwise. She had an eye for scale in a way that was uncommon, the ability to hold the macro and the micro in balance, to talk about the city's waterfront redevelopment in the same breath as the specific problem of how natural light moved through a north-facing lobby in February. He realized at some point in the second hour, genuinely enjoying himself, which was not a feeling he associated strongly with firm dinners. Around him, the room was thinning. The junior architects had moved toward the bar in tighter configurations. The partners were making the slow farewells of people who had other early mornings. Fletcher Moss, passing at one point, glanced at the two of them and did a small, involuntary recalibration. Gordon caught it, the half-second where Fletcher's expression shifted from dismissal to something more attentive, trying to work out what he was missing. Gordon looked back at Renee and said nothing about it. Your firm should speak to ours again, Renee said at one point. Not casually, seriously. Not about Harborview. I'm not asking for that. But there's a project in Thunder Bay. Waterfront commercial development, mid-scale, sustainable certification required. We've been looking for a design partner who understands load-bearing sustainability in northern climates, and your work on the Creston project suggests you understand it better than most. Gordon considered that. You'd want to send a proposal to Bruce Ashfield. I'd want to send a proposal to you, she said, if that's appropriate to say. It's appropriate, he said. I don't know, she said more quietly, how the politics of this firm work. I don't know if my company's name on an email is still the kind of thing that causes problems for people here. I'll handle that, he said. She looked at him. There was something in the look that wasn't quite surprise, more like the careful recalibration of a person who has learned to be cautious about assurances and who was deciding slowly whether to believe this one. Why? She said. You don't know me. I know your work, he said. I looked up the Colbert Group before I walked over, on my phone. The community center in Sudbury, the residential complex in Kingston, the heritage restoration in Ottawa's Lowertown. He paused. Your company does serious work, the kind that lasts. I don't think the Harborview situation reflects your judgment, because I don't think you had the authority to exercise judgment in that situation yet. And I think people in this room have been treating you as though you're the reason for something you inherited, which is both inaccurate and unkind." The room was quieter now. Perhaps 20 people remained. The chandeliers felt larger in the reduced space, the crystal throwing small prisms across the white tablecloths. Renee set her wineglass down. "I've been in this industry for 18 years, she said, "and I don't think anyone has ever quite." She stopped, started again. "Thank you. You don't need to thank me for accuracy." "I'm not thanking you for accuracy," she said. "I'm thanking you for the 5 minutes it took to look it up." He understood the difference. 5 minutes was nothing. 5 minutes was also everything, in a room full of people who hadn't taken them. The last guests were moving toward the coat check. The events staff were beginning the quiet archaeology of a dinner concluded, clearing glasses, folding linen, restoring the room to its neutral state. Gordon helped Renee with her coat, not because she needed help, she'd managed the first arm herself before he moved, but because it was there to do and he did it. She said thank you in the same direct way she'd said everything else. They waited for the elevator together. "Will you actually send the proposal?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "If you actually want it, I do. You should know," she said, in the tone of someone making a disclosure they have decided is necessary, that my company is in a rebuilding period. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. We're smaller than we were 2 years ago, and I've restructured in ways that were necessary but not popular. The Thunder Bay project is real and the funding is sound, but we are not the Colbert Group that walked into the Harborview negotiation. We're something I'm still building." "I understand," he said. "I wanted to say it directly so you have the full picture. I appreciate it." The elevator arrived. The doors opened. They stepped in. "Can I ask you something?" she said as the doors closed. "Yes, why did you come over to where I was sitting?" "Not the explanation you gave about the crane in the harbor. The real reason." Gordon was quiet for a moment, looking at the elevator doors. "I've been in rooms like that one," he said finally, "earlier in my career. Not for the same reasons, but the feeling of being in the room and also somehow outside it, of people looking slightly past you, making the calculation that knowing you is a complexity they'd rather not take on." Renee said nothing. "I didn't do anything about it for a long time," he said. "I told myself it didn't matter, or that it would pass, or that the work would eventually speak for itself. And eventually it did. But the time it took, the years of it, that was its own cost. I don't have a great deal of patience anymore for watching that cost accrue to someone who hasn't earned it." The elevator opened on the lobby. The marble floor gleamed in the late light. Outside, through the glass doors, King Street moved with the low Friday traffic of a city winding down. "That's the real reason," he said. Renee Colbert nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that means more than agreement. They walked out through the glass doors onto the street. The October air was cold and clean in the particular way of late October in Toronto, the kind of air that tells you something is ending and something else hasn't started yet. Their cars were in different directions. They said goodbye at the corner with the brief, direct ease of two people who don't need to perform a farewell because something real has already passed between them. Gordon walked to his car. He sat for a moment before starting it, looking at the street through the windshield. He thought about the room upstairs, the chandeliers and the cream-colored name badges, and the careful social weather of an evening where people had looked past Renee Colbert, the way you look past a door you've decided not to open. He thought about the 5 minutes he'd taken on his phone before crossing the room, the Sudbury Community Center, the Kingston Residential Complex, the Lowertown Heritage Restoration in Ottawa, all of it good and serious and lasting. He thought about the particular quality of her laugh when it had surprised her, that short, involuntary sound, and the way she'd pressed her fingers to her lips as if checking whether it had really happened. He thought about what it cost. Not for him tonight. Tonight had cost him nothing. He'd walked across a room, read 2 minutes of a company portfolio on his phone, and had one of the better conversations of his professional year. But for her, months of it, he suspected. Months of walking into rooms where people made the calculation that knowing her required taking a position and deciding, for their own small reasons, in their own small ways, not to take one. Months of having the work speak clearly and not being heard, because the hearing required someone to stop looking past the door and actually open it. 5 minutes. He started the car. He had a proposal to think about. A project in Thunder Bay, waterfront, sustainable full certification, northern climate. He had an early morning and a long week ahead. He realized with a quietness that was not unusual for him but felt slightly different tonight, something to look forward to. The city moved around him as he drove. Towers and bridges, the lake at the end of every southward street, the lights doing their nightly work of making the ordinary beautiful if you were paying attention. He was always paying attention. That had always been the thing about him, though very few people in that room tonight would have known to name it. Quietly, without announcement, without the need to be seen doing it, he just paid attention. That was how it started. That was, more often than people understood, how the most important things did.